Hey everyone, welcome to the Property Podcast. It's Rob B here with, of course, Rob D. And we've got a bumper episode for you this week. We've got holiday reading material. We've got property transactions collapsing. We've got the Housing Minister. We launch Property Hub Extra. Oh, and we try and fix the property market.
Yes, thank you for joining us for the Property Podcast, where every Thursday, property investors come together to be informed and inspired. Today we're sharing our own ideas about how to fix the housing market. General consensus is that it's broken, but no one really seems to know what to do about it. Well, we volunteer our own suggestions, and we've got loads more to pack in as well, so we'd better get on with it. All right, well, someone must have heard that we were recording this episode today, because we've got two news stories this week, both looking at what's wrong with the property market and how to fix it. The first of those stories is from The Guardian, and the headline is "Radical Plans to End Huge Costs of Buying a Freehold Have Been Unveiled." Now, I've heard lots about leasehold matters over the last couple of years. Leasehold houses in particular have got a lot of publicity. And the Law Commission was asked last year by Sajid Javid to look into what can be done about this whole thing. And they've come back with some proposals for how to make it easier and cheaper for leaseholders to buy their freehold. So at the moment, it can be very expensive to buy the freehold. If the lease has got fewer than 80 years remaining, it gets very complicated in terms of how you calculate it, and it gets even more expensive. They have proposed to simplify it by saying that leaseholders will just have to pay 10 times their current ground yet to convert the property from leasehold to freehold. So if you're paying a fairly typical ground rent of £200 a year, then for £2,000 you could have the freehold. Now, that is massively different from how things are now. These are only proposals at the moment, and there's going to be a lot of vested interests who are not going to want this to happen. Some of the wealthiest people in Britain, like the Duke of Westminster, own huge portfolios of freeholds and will very much not want anything like this to come to fruition.
Yeah, and while I think this would be a good move, that's the reason I don't think it'll happen. Because you've got very wealthy and powerful people who this wouldn't suit. And generally, wealthy and powerful people get their own way. I could be surprised here. And I think it's great that we're talking about it. And I think it's great that it's on the table as an agenda point, and rightly so, because it is a bit of a mess. And it's one of many things that doesn't help our property market. But I don't think what's currently been proposed will see the light of day. But even if we get a watered down version of it and it's an improvement on what we have now, then that's a good thing. Our next news story is why transactions have slumped. So a story in Estate Agent today seems to have come up with a reason for transactions slumping. So the Land Registry recently showed that there's a 20% slump in housing transactions, which is huge, massive, massive fall. The reason why? Well, potentially one of the reasons why is that people are now looking to refinance instead and take equity out of their homes rather than move on. What's stopping them moving on? Well, we'll look at that shortly. But it's really interesting to see that such a huge drop in people moving on from their homes, taking equity out instead, and in many cases probably to extend or improve their own homes that they live in. Not necessarily a great thing for the housing market, because a fluid housing market, lots of transactions happening, is a good thing for all concerned. So it's worrying to see that huge drop. But don't worry, Rob and I think we've got the answers.
But before those answers, a few things that you need to know about. First of all, meetups are next Thursday. It's that time again. It's going to be the first Thursday of August, and that means meetups at multiple locations across the country and beyond. So if you're not off on holiday, make sure you get along to a meetup. Go to thepropertyhub.net/meetups and book your place.
But if you are off on holiday, make sure you take our new shiny Property Hub magazine. Should be hitting doorsteps around the 8th of August, maybe a few days after. Don't panic if it doesn't land on that specific day, but it'll be with you soon. So if you're holidaying late August, then you've got the lovely Property Hub magazine to take with you, with a big feature on remote investing, which we'll be talking about on next week's show.
So you might not even need to come back from your holiday. And another really exciting bit of news is that for the following issue of the magazine, we have pinned down the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government, James Brokenshire, and he is going to be answering questions from property hubbers. He has perhaps unwisely volunteered to take your questions about the housing market, around how investors are treated, and anything else you want to put his way. We're going to be sending those questions over for him to answer, and we'd love to include yours. We need to have those questions in by this time next week. So if you've got a question that you'd like to put to a government minister, and I'm sure you do keep it polite though, you can send it over by going to thepropertyhub.net/asktheminister. So that's thepropertyhub.net/asktheminister. You can submit your question there. We will send it over to James Brokenshire, and in the November issue of the magazine, you will see what he has to say. So it's widely acknowledged that the UK housing market is broken. The government even came out with a white paper last year called How to Fix the UK's Broken Housing Market. Very few people are completely happy with how the housing market operates in this country, and lots of people are actively very, very unhappy about it. Lots of political parties and different organisations have put forward various proposals, but nothing much really seems to change. We've heard already today about how transactions are falling, the market's getting jammed up, prices are higher than most people can afford. And if you have bought or sold a house recently, then you'll know just how painful it can be. So in today's episode, we're going to put forward our own ideas for how to fix the housing market.
So Rob, first up on our list is the legal system. We've both suffered, and I'm sure the majority of the listeners have suffered by navigating their way through our current legal system when buying a property. It's a nightmare. Service levels are atrocious. The system is broken at best. Can you put your finger on what really is wrong with it and why it doesn't work?
So many things. It's difficult to identify one factor because I think there's lots of different things interacting, including the fact that at the heart of it, it's people, and people where a lot of times this is their biggest asset. It's something immensely valuable to them. So it's very stressful. There's a lot at stake, and you're never going to be able to take all of that out of it. But there are so many things that really, really don't help. The conveyancing process being a big one. Even if everything goes smoothly, it takes such a long time to get a transaction through. Why does it take 2 or 3 months for a normal property to get sold? You've got one party who wants to sell. You've got one party who wants to buy. They both want exactly the same thing. They both already agreed on the price, which is the most contentious bit, before the 12-week clock even starts ticking. And yet it still somehow manages to take forever and be really stressful. Solicitors are not a popular part of the process. I'm sure there are some things that they could do better, but some things that are just outside their control, such as the fact that so much stuff is paper-based. It involves writing letters and lodging documents and all this kind of stuff that really drags things out. And Rob, as you know from negotiating as a big part of what you do all day, time is one of the biggest killers of deals. The longer something drags on for, the more chance there is for something to go wrong, and the less likely the deal is to happen. So having all these enormous delays baked into it on top of all this stress is just an absolute recipe for disaster.
It is. I mean, as you say, there's large sums of money involved, whether this is an investment transaction or just, a normal traditional housing transaction where two people are wanting to buy and sell a home. When such vast quantities of money are involved, people can and do get emotional, especially when it just drags out. I've seen deal after deal collapse because of how long it's taken. And often it comes down to the legal system. It could be that searches are taking forever. It could be that one party's solicitor is not very good and a bit slow. It could be that the solicitors fall out. There are so many variables, and I think that's the problem with this. There are so many variables that things often do go wrong. You can do all the hard work up front, do all your research, find a perfect investment, get the vendor on side, do everything right, and then the legal process ruin your deal. It sounds dramatic, but it's true. It just happens, and it's really, really unfortunate. Sometimes people can be patient, and then deals go on for so long that mortgage offers expire. I've seen that happen so many times as well. That takes a long time to happen, but it does happen. And then you have to start again or get an extension, which is just more pain, more headache, more stress. So while we spend a lot of our time talking about getting a deal or managing your property once you've got a deal, actually a big part of it is this transactional part, which unfortunately is one of the worst parts of property investment.
And so what can you do about it? It's difficult because there is so much that needs to be fixed. I think we talked before about the Scottish system, and I know the system in Scotland isn't perfect, but I do think it's an improvement. One of the things that I think that they've got right is that the onus is on the seller to get all the relevant information together so prospective buyers can see it before they even make a bid. Because the way it works at the moment in England and Wales, when you think about it, it's just bonkers that you have to go, you see a property, you just kind of visually inspect it yourself, then you make an offer, and then after that offer's been accepted and you might have negotiated about it for a couple of weeks, you then at your own expense go through the process of finding out what the condition of the property really is, if there's any legal issues, if there's anything wrong with it structurally, all this kind of thing. You really should have that information before you start. And if you get all of that out the way and you can make your offer in the full knowledge of what the property is actually like, then it should reduce friction along the way. It also helps that all the relevant documents will have already been produced. So if you need searches, and that takes a couple of weeks for the local authority to get back to you, you'll have them in hand already. So there is a lot of work to do in the process of transacting in property. But if you can get all that work done in advance, it seems to me that it will then make the later stages of the process a lot easier, and you'll have far fewer transactions falling apart because of defects or challenges with the property that people weren't aware of before they bid.
It's almost baffling to think that we've got Scotland there doing a better job of what's happening in England and Wales. They've proven it. It's not a concept anymore. It's like, this can be done. It does work. It's not a big faff to implement, but yet we haven't done it, and we keep going along with this broken, out-of-date system that's holding transactions back and collapsing deals. It makes no sense, and really solution number one, and you need a few solutions for this area of property, unfortunately, but the big one, as you say, Rob, would be adopting that system. And then once that's implemented, you can look at other things like service levels from solicitors. It'd be great if you could assess solicitors and find it easy to pick good ones to work with, but also on both sides, because you may have the world's greatest solicitor, but if the vendor's got a lemon, then I don't hold high hopes for your transaction. Doesn't matter how good your solicitor is, it's the two parties working well and working well together that counts.
Yeah, and there's so much that can be done with technology as well. Like, I've got a solicitor at the moment who I'm using because they are brilliant in terms of they're not going to miss anything and it's going to be a comprehensive job, but they send me letters in the post. So it just creates these really unnecessary delays while things are in the post. And if I want to know where that transaction's up to, I've got to actually call them and try and pin them down. If the whole process just moved online so you could see where things are up to and get alerted when you need to be doing something, because let's not forget, we blame solicitors a lot, but a lot of the time it's either the buyer or the seller who needs to do something but doesn't realise they need to do it, but then it takes about 5 people a load of time to try to pin down who needs to do what and then get them to do it. If the whole thing is brought online and you get these instant alerts, and it's just like everything else in life really, it's not stuck in the past, that's going to make things a lot easier as well. You see some solicitors already doing it and it does make a really big difference.
So next up, we've got reform stamp duty. Stamp duty, so unpopular, and rightly so. Stamp duty is killing transactions. I'm referring back to our news story earlier where transactions are down 20% currently on where they were a year ago. A huge fall. I think stamp duty has a large part to play in that. And it amazes me that we persist with the current version of stamp duty. It's particularly damaging in the southeast of England where house prices are higher, because it's really stalling the market there. I appreciate £1 million house in the north is quite excessive, but in the south, that's called a family home. And yes, that is a lot of money, but that's what it is. But the stamp duty level on that property is 10%. Now, you may be saying, well, if you can afford £1 million house, you should be paying the 10% stamp duty. Well, here's the thing. It's not a mansion. As I said, it's a family house now in the southeast, £1 million, or certainly approaching that level. So paying £100,000 out cash in stamp duty just puts people off. And what it means is that people will refinance instead. And that's why if you drive around many suburbs in the southeast, you see so many builders who are busy doing refurbs. That's what people are doing instead. They're staying put. And that's not good for the property market. That the property market is quite stagnant. It's not moving. There's not enough transactions happening. A more fluid market is better for all concerned. But even if you look at a property of 300,000, paying 5% on that is a lot of money. That's close to a deposit on another property, certainly a buy-to-let anyway. So this system for me doesn't work. It needs to go, and we need a better version.
Yeah, I think stamp duty and the legal system combined are the reasons for this fall in transactions. If you were trying to design a system to stop people from buying and selling houses, you couldn't do much better than what we've got now. It's like, well, it will cost you a fortune and it's going to be really, really hard and it's going to take ages and it's going to be emotional draining. Do you fancy selling your house? Of course not. If you can just refinance instead, you're going to do that. The disincentives to transact are enormous. It's bad enough just with how difficult it is. And then you chuck in a massive tax on it, and that just seals the deal. It's obvious why the government likes stamp duty. It's a really good thing for them to be able to tax because it's basically impossible to avoid it. You can't just pick up your property and move it elsewhere. You can't have your interest protected unless it's on the land registry, and so stamp duty gets sorted out as part of that process. That's why it's a popular tax for them. But given that they want and need a fluid housing market, having such high levels of tax just doesn't make sense.
So what solutions do we have here? Well, you could scrap it, but the government isn't going to do that because they need the revenue, and they've got used to that revenue. Even though scrapping it would really stimulate the housing market and would benefit the government's coffers overall, they're not going to do it. They're not going to be brave enough. So the alternative option, and one that seems to make a lot of sense, is moving who pays stamp duty from the buyer to the seller. So instead of when you buy a property, you pay out that money. When you sell it, you pay out the money instead. Now, why would that help? Well, people would price it in to their transactions. It'd probably lift the property market up a few percent straight away. But if people know exactly what they've got to pay out once they sell the property, it'll make things a lot easier. Plus, once you've sold a property as well, having the funds in your bank, it just feels less aggressive, knowing that normally when you sell something, you have to pay a tax. That's how taxes normally go. We're not used to paying tax when we buy something. I know there's VAT, but you don't really notice it because it's all baked in. So I don't think it's a perfect solution, Rob, but I think it'll go a long way to reducing this issue that we've got where people simply just don't want to move house.
Agreed, and perhaps even regional rates of stamp duty need to be looked at, because if the intention is to have really high rates for people who are transacting in like multi-million pound houses, because hey, they can afford it, if they've got enough money to buy that house, they can afford to pay a couple $100,000 in stamp duty. Well, that doesn't quite work in the southeast, where it is, like you say, just a family home, and you need those families to be moving because they might need to move because of work, then it might need to move up to somewhere bigger, which then frees up a property for somebody who's making the next step up from there. If you tax the top end of the market to a standstill, it doesn't just affect rich people, it affects everything the whole way down the chain. So those are two ideas that we've got for getting the market moving again. But when people talk about the housing crisis, normally what they mean is that not enough is being built in the first place. The government has famously missed its housing target every year since it first had housing targets. So something isn't working, Rob. So the third ingredient for this solution is making it easier for people to build.
So the government makes a lot of noise about building more homes and how developers need to get on side and how they're releasing funds here, there and everywhere, and the developers are land banking. I can tell you right now as developers, this is a load of nonsense. There is little to no help for developers out there. Yes, there's help to buy, which helps people onto the market, but actually getting homes built, it's so restrictive. It's so archaic, the system for getting planning, for moving forward. It takes forever. Months, if not years at a time sometimes, to get planning through. I can give you an example. We're looking at a site right now. I'm planning for the person selling that development, and it's less than 20 units. Took 3 years for not even 20 units. So then it's no surprise that when hundreds of properties or thousands of properties are involved, that it takes many, many years to get planning through. How can a government complain when it takes so long? The planning system is abysmal. It's completely underfunded, so there's not enough bodies working there, so it can take you months at a time to just get an answer on a query. Or heaven forbid you want to make some minor changes to improve the development, again, can set your site back months. It's a terrible system. It's not one that most people get to see because most people don't develop properties. But we can tell you it is a mess and it does need fixing because we need new homes. We do have a housing crisis, but the way things are currently, it isn't going to be fixed anytime soon.
And that's where I think the accusations of land banking come from, because it's perceived that a builder has owned a site for several years and nothing's visibly happened yet. But if that's your business, you have to have sites lined up for the next few years, because it can take years to actually get it through planning, get all the conditions discharged, and actually get in a position to put a spade in the ground. So if you were just working on one site at a time, you'd basically have to send everyone home for a year while you wait to get the next one ready to go. And I think that's a large reason why the market is dominated by big house builders, because they've got the funds and the infrastructure and the resources to actually build this pipeline over the next however many years and also navigate their way through the planning system. It used to be the case that the majority of homes in the UK were built by small local developers, but it's so difficult now because they just don't have the capacity or the funds or the know-how to get one site at a time through planning, which can take ages, then eke out the profit for that while they go through the same process on the next one. So Rob, I'll throw it over to you because I'm sure you've got a nice easy answer for this one. What do you do about it?
Well, it's not simple. You do have to put some money at it. The planning authorities, at a local level, the planning authorities are completely overwhelmed. They're under-resourced and they can't deal with what's coming through now. And we're not building enough now. What we should have is a system to fast-track developments through, say, 50 units or under. It should be easy for planning to be achieved there because there are lots of plots and parcels of land around this size of sort of 2 or 3 up to 50 units that if we could just get those going, get those built, then that would go a long way to easing the housing crisis. Now, I know if you're going to build a new garden city or you're going to build a development of a few hundred homes, the wider impact on that area could be positive or negative and people will want to have a discussion. I get that. But 10 houses in an area that's already got houses and it's a plot of land in the middle of a load of other houses, why does that need to take so long? You know, I gave a reference of 3 years before. That site isn't in a greenbelt area. It isn't in an area of outstanding beauty. It's just next to other houses. It doesn't make sense. There should be a way of getting planning approved or rejected within, say, 60 days of submitting an application if it's got 50 units or less. If we just did that, then the amount of properties that would come through onto the market would increase dramatically. And then there'd be a lot of smaller developers who get involved because that big headache's taken away, which again will help ease the housing crisis. And some of those smaller developers maybe go on to become medium-sized and bigger and then help again towards getting more homes built. So just starting at the bottom end and doing something a little bit more dramatic there should mean that it'll ripple out and benefit the whole property market and hopefully make a meaningful dent in that housing crisis that we have.
And I think related to that, something that could happen as part of housing policy is actually allow smaller homes and smaller rooms as well. Because yes, homes in the UK are small compared to elsewhere in the world. And of course, given the choice, most people would want to have a bigger house. But if it's a choice between having no house and one that's a bit smaller than you'd ideally like, I know what most people would choose. And there are lots of potential developments that end up not happening because of restrictions around sizes. So there was one potential investment that I was going to be involved in funding, which was, I think it was of about 5 flats. But in the end, once the plans had been done, the sizes were just a little bit too small. So in the end, they'd have to reconfigure things and could only get 3 in there. And that just killed the whole thing. It just wasn't profitable enough. So as a result, that's 5 homes that do not exist. And we're not talking cupboards here. They would have been perfectly adequate. And similarly, we're seeing something in housing policy right now, which is going to make matters worse, which is the minimum room size rules for HMOs. So there are lots of HMOs which have got one single room, not very big, but people have been living them up till now. From October onwards, if they fall below a certain size, they won't be able to be rented out anymore. You can see where it's coming from. They want people to have enough space. But these are rooms that people have been living in. They've been paying rent to live there. They've been paying less rent than they would for a bigger room. So it means that people who can't afford a bigger room can still afford to live somewhere. As a result of these rules, that option is being taken away. Again, obviously, you don't want overcrowding. You don't want people having to live in ridiculous conditions, but it is making the problem worse. So you can see the idea behind all these policies and restrictions and kind of centrally enforced regulations, but it can have unintended consequences. But I think a bit more flexibility, especially at the local level, to make the right decisions that are needed for that area would go a long way to sorting this out.
So Rob, we've talked about things that the government could do, but there are also things they could stop doing as well.
Yeah, there's some things that they could stop doing that are really just making the problem worse. And I think there is this disconnect where you've got a stated aim where it's like, well, we want housing prices to fall. We want there to be more housing. We want people to have more options. But on the other hand, governments are aware that the majority of people at the moment are homeowners. They like to see their wealth rising. And they're far more likely to vote for the party that's currently in power if they feel like they've got wealthier over the last few years. And rightly or wrongly, probably wrongly, let's face it, the way that a lot of people in the UK judge their wealth is by the value of their biggest asset, which is normally their home. As a result, there's a lot of things that the government do that have the effect of constraining supply or making finance easier and boosting house prices at exactly the time that they're saying that they're trying to do the opposite. So Help to Buy is an example of that. It's making it easier, theoretically, for first-time buyers to get on the housing ladder, but what that's done is had the effect of reducing the cost of finance or increasing loan-to-values. It means that given constrained supply and a higher amount of demand, of course, it's going to push prices up. So things like that are nice for the direct beneficiary, but perhaps not as nice as it seems because prices have already been pushed up just by the existence of the policy. And it's very nice for property investors who are getting to see the value of their assets going up, but it's not so good for the housing market as a whole. And I think it's this contradiction between what the government needs to happen for its own electability, but wants to happen from a policy point of view that creates a lot of the strange things that we see in the housing market and why there hasn't really been a coherent policy on any of the things that we've talked about today.
So is this all likely to be implemented in the next few weeks? Well, we can pass our suggestions on to the Housing Minister, but I don't think so. Some of it seems pretty straightforward, like introducing the system that Scotland has for housing transactions and their legal process seems to make a lot of sense. That would be an easy win and would make a dramatic difference to the property market in England and Wales straight away. Out of all the things we've talked about, probably got the highest chance of being implemented. Maybe Help to Buy will be reeled back at some point as well. It's going to have to happen at some point. So again, that may be changed or removed altogether. Some of the stuff out there that has probably got less chance of seeing the light of day is the reforming of stamp duty. There's a lot of conversation around it now, which is great, but I think there's a long way to go before anything's implemented. Rob, if you could pick just one thing, one change, I'd appreciate it's not going to fix everything, but what would it be? Out of everything we've talked about today, what would you introduce or remove?
I'm really torn, Rob, between sorting out the legal system and making it easier to build. One of those will make a real difference to supply and building the right houses in the right places. The other will make transactions so much more fluid and make better use of the housing stock we've already got. If pushed, I think I'd go for sorting out the legal system. It's the kind of thing where there's not so many vested interests. There's less kind of complication in there. It feels like it's quite doable and it would make such an enormous difference to everything. So that wouldn't fix everything, but it feels like a really good first step.
Completely agree. But we'd love to know what you would do. Would you do some of the things we've suggested? Or do you completely disagree with some of the things we've suggested? Or have you got ideas or solutions that we've just not discussed today? We'd love to hear. Go to thepropertyhub.net/fix market. That's thepropertyhub.net/fix market, where you'll find a link to the forum where we'd love your suggestions there. And do you agree with what we've said? Let us know, and we will read out some of those suggestions in a few weeks' time. Be interested to see what you think. So go on, Hubbers, head along to thepropertyhub.net/fix market.
So in just a second, we've got our brand new feature, Hub Extra, coming up. But first, Rob, every week we make time to acknowledge someone who's left us a lovely 5-star review.
We certainly do, and a big thank you to Finnegan McNeil, who said, I found the two Robs in Feb 27 and listened to all their podcasts. Leave the sharks out who are out to get your money and start your free education here. The free courses and content are superb and backed up by numerous books and great online forum. I've used these resources and now onto my second property flip and many more on the way. Goals are set and are being achieved. When I'm financially secure in 10 years' time, I know who to thank. Keep up the great work. Well, keep up the great work yourself. That sounds incredible what you've done in such a short space of time, and I'm sure with that dedication and focus you will get your financial freedom. So well done. Thank you.
Now, if you've been a long-time listener of the Property Podcast and hopefully left us a review yourself by now, you'll remember a feature called Resource of the Week. It went away, but it's come back and it's better than ever. We're calling this part of the show Hub Extra. It's where we share a resource, a tip, a tool, a book, a tactic, something that's working for us, something that's caught our eye that we think you'll be able to benefit from. And we're going to be bunging at least one of those into the Property Podcast every single week.
But that's not all. Yes, we have even more. So starting from this week, so this Friday, go to your email inbox and look out for the Property Hub Extra email. It will be the most valuable email to hit your inbox every single week. Where, yes, we'll give you a resource, but we'll give you more. We'll give you the things that have caught our attention across the web each week. Property, inspiration, business, it's all in there. It's all concise. You can digest it in a few minutes, but then spend the rest of your weekend digging into the awesome resources we will give you. So make sure Friday morning you look out for the Property Hub Extra email. It's brand new. It's replacing what we've sent out in the past, and you're going to absolutely love it. We're spending time every single week creating what we feel will be the most valuable email you'll receive. So keep a lookout for that one. But Rob, let's start strong. Let's double up. Let's give 2 resources.
Yeah, let's. And this is a risky one because we're giving you a way to find other podcasts to listen to. The brilliant thing about podcasts is there's something out there about absolutely every topic. Whatever you're interested in, there will be an episode of a podcast or an entire series of podcasts about that topic for you to dig into. It's absolutely brilliant. What's not so brilliant is discoverability. It's not easy to find podcasts that you're interested in. So once you've caught up on the Property Podcast and Ask Rob and Rob, what do you listen to next? We've got 2 tools to solve that problem for you. The first is a web-based tool called Listen Notes. It's listennotes.com. This is basically Google for podcasts. So you could type in a topic, a person, anything you like, and it will show you episodes of podcasts about that topic. So for example, I just typed in Elon Musk, and it's come up with a whole range of different podcast episodes where Elon Musk has been featured or talked about. So that's a really great tool, and it's also got suggestions of trended topics and curated lists and all that kind of thing to make it easy for you to find your next favourite podcast. But that's not all, Rob.
No, because that's a desktop website, but many of us consume podcasts on our phones, and I am one of those people. So we have a solution for you if you want to search for podcasts on your phone, if you are an Apple iPhone user. Now, Apple iPhone have their own podcast app called Podcasts. Now, I actually don't use that for my normal subscription, but I do use it to search because the search functionality in that app is really powerful. So for those with Apple iPhones, open your native podcast app. If you've deleted it, just go back and search for it for free, download it, and use the search function. If you type in, again, say Elon Musk, and you want to listen to all the episodes that Elon has been involved in or talked about, type in his name, go to the episode section, click See All, and then you'll have a huge list, which I'm scrolling through now, gosh, there's a lot, of episodes that have either featured or has involved the discussion point around Elon Musk. It's a great tool. I'll often get excited about a different theme, topic, piece of history, business, individual, whoever it may be, and I'll use this to search for them, to dig into that person or topic even more. There's 2 great tools there. Take advantage of them. And as I say, take advantage of the new email that will be hitting your inbox every single Friday, the Hub Extra email. We know you're going to love it. And of course, like nearly everything else we do, it's free.
So that's the housing market fixed. We can now get on with our days. We'll be back next Thursday and, of course, with Ask Rob and Rob on Tuesday. In the meantime, if you want to hear what we get up to off the podcast, go over to thepropertyhub.net/discover. Get yourself booked into our next free, of course, discovery webinar. And if anything that we've talked about today has sparked a question that you'd like to ask the Minister responsible for housing policy in the UK, then we can do that as well. Go over to thepropertyhub.net/asktheminister and you can submit a question that we'll be putting to James Brokenshire to be answered in the next issue of the Property Hub magazine. So lots to be getting on with. All that remains is for us to wish you goodbye. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.